Someone posted a question earlier today and then it was taken down. It was deleted. So I don't know. Sometimes people post a question and then the question gets answered. So they take their question down. But sometimes I know that sometimes people might post a question and then they feel embarrassed about the question for whatever reason. So I'm going to go ahead and answer the question. I won't say who asked it because I don't know what their reason was for taking it down. And it doesn't matter anyway who asked it. The question is, what about eating at Mediterranean? So the title of the video is Do Not Eat Blood or the Meat of Strangled Animals. This was the instruction in the book of Acts. So we're going to read it. The instruction was also do not eat food sacrificed to idols. But we're going to talk about that because that has a specific situation attached to it. So the question reads, what about eating at a Mediterranean restaurant where they would never tell you that it's been offered up to Allah? But obviously, every Muslim offers their animal up to Allah. So will I ever be able to eat at a Mediterranean restaurant again? I've only been eating their vegetable dishes. A while back, somewhere around October 7th, 2023, there was someone in the body who had obviously been carried away by false doctrines in Christian Zionism. And around that time, the body was discerning actually this passage in Acts about don't eat the meat of strangled animals and don't eat the blood of animals. And the body started to discern this issue of what is it that we're supposed to be, we haven't considered this command. And what is it that God is saying? What is it that he wants us to do? And we realized that there is a specific way that God said to care for these animals in a specific way that they would have been slaughtered. And that the way that meat in the grocery store, the way that those animals were cared for is definitely not happening in the way that God established. And the way that an animal is supposed to be slaughtered is the blood is supposed to be drained immediately. And if it's not, the blood starts to go back into certain areas of the body. And God has specifically said that we are not allowed to eat the blood of an animal because the life is in it. We do not eat the life blood. There's something sacred about the life blood. And so God has told us not to eat it. It's a command. And then, of course, we have, the command to not eat the meat of strangled animals, which is a care issue. And you guys consider this for a minute. Jesus uses sheep to describe his flock, to describe his people, his church. There's no way that God would be okay with a bunch of animals smashed into a cage or stalls and then put through a mill where they are massacred by a machine. This is completely inhumane. So it's not going to be enough for you to take the meat of an animal who was cared for in that way or not cared for and was mistreated and abused in its lifetime, given a horrible life day after day, and then massacred in this machine, and you're just going to soak the meat or something, soak the blood out of it. You got to go for the heart of God, not treating this as a box to be checked. The heart of God is love and care. So at the time that we were discerning this, there were two options. We could either go kosher or we could go halal, because both have these, slaughter practices that are in line with what God has commanded. We decided to go halal because in kosher, there are so many additions to the scroll. We were not comfortable with it. So we decided to go halal. And someone who was in the body at that time, being carried away by false teachings in Reform Judaism and Zionism, this person was so outraged and sent me a message accusing me of being an anti-Semite, first of all. By the way, first Christians were Jews. I don't know how you can be an anti-Semite. I'm talking about a distortion of Judaism that has occurred over time that is not actually Judaism, because Christianity is the fulfillment of Judaism. And I'm not going to eat kosher because I don't like Jews. I'm not going to eat kosher because I don't like additions to the scroll. In any event, she said, I would never step foot into a market where they worship Allah. Let me explain something very clearly. Allah is the Arabic name for God. It's the Arabic word for God. Allah is not the name of a false god. It is the Arabic name or word for God. Islam is a monotheistic religion. They claim to worship one God, just like Judaism claims to worship one God. Are you saying, I would never step foot into a kosher market because they worship that whatever? For all intents and purposes, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are claiming to worship one God. They're claiming to worship the same God. Now, when Jesus went to speak with the woman at the well, and by the way, I want to make this clear. The person who posted this comment, I don't believe that she has that same attitude. I don't believe that at all. The other person obviously did and didn't know what they were talking about. But not everyone who doesn't know what they're talking about has that attitude. Remember that when Jesus went to, and was speaking to the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman at the well, he said to her, you Samaritans worship what you don't know. We Jews worship what we do know. You worship what you don't know. Salvation is coming through the Jews. Did he say, you worship what you don't know? I would never step foot in your market or whatever. As a matter of fact, Jews didn't associate with Samaritans, and yet Jesus asked her for a drink. And she responded to him, you're a Jew. I'm a Samaritan. How can you ask me for something to drink? And the book of John says, because Jews did not associate with Samaritans. He wasn't put off by her. He wasn't afraid of her. And I say that very intentionally because there are people calling themselves Christian who are lunatics, who are afraid of those who are in other religions or those who have other beliefs or those who do worship false gods. Why would you be afraid of them? Why would you treat that situation any differently than Jesus treated that situation? And let me tell you how Jesus treated that situation. He stayed in Samaria, I believe it was 2 extra days. And he couldn't even stay in his own hometown because the Jews there who claimed to actually believe in God didn't believe in him. There's no reason for you to be disgusted or put off or afraid of anybody's beliefs. As a matter of fact, you've been commanded to have compassion for those people. I'm not afraid to go and shop at a halal market. And as I mentioned, I prefer to go to a halal market than a kosher market. Now let me show you where this is in scripture because that's really what matters. So Paul said, it is my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. Instead, we should write to them, telling them to abstain from food polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, from the meat of strangled animals, and from blood. Now, abstaining from sexual immorality, the meat of strangled animals, and from blood are straightforward. The part that we're going to focus on is telling them to abstain from food polluted by idols. What Paul is getting at is an issue of conscience. He talks about that in 1 Corinthians 10, because that's the issue. If you believe something to be a sin, and you genuinely believe that food has been sacrificed to idols and that an idol is anything, then you should abstain from it. But this is the reason why he is not exempting you from understanding what the word has to say. What was happening at the time when he was preaching the gospel to the Gentiles is that the Gentiles had been sacrificing to idols. And so this is sort of like something that I have, shared with you on the channel before. When I was really sick, people would bring me like crystals and they would say, sleep with this under your pillow and blah, blah, blah. And so you start to attribute some sort of power to the crystal. And in your heart, you're believing that that crystal has some sort of power. So I had to get rid of them. I had to get rid of them because, if I looked at them, my heart would go back to this idea that that thing had some sort of power. And so in order for to circumcise my heart from attributing power to anything else, I had to get rid of whatever else I thought had power. Now, you might think, oh, you're an idiot for thinking that. And that's true. That's true. How about you with medicine? How about you with vitamins? How about you with, food, you got to eat this and you got to make sure that you have all of these colors on your plate and blah, blah, blah. Have you not grown up with that? Have you not believed that? Well, what about the book of Daniel? I mean, Daniel was not eating the food that was the royal food. He just ate vegetables. Well, goodness me, where was Daniel going to get his protein and, all of this stuff that we think is keeping us alive? Does not the word say that God is the one who heals us? Does he heal us through medicine and supplements and food? Or is this a matter of righteousness? You all have believed lies too. Daniel ate just vegetables, and him and his men were looking better than those eating the royal food. God didn't say you need to have all of this variety in your diet. Seek first the kingdom of heaven, guys, and all of these things will be added to you. You're going to have health. Nowhere in the Bible does he talk about some sort of nutrition plan that you need to have in order to be healthy. Elijah wasn't worried about the widow and her son who were only eating bread. He wasn't like, oh, well, go make me the bread and then God's going to give you the rainbow color of vegetables so that you can make sure that you get this vitamin and that vitamin. It's idolatry. Okay, so my point is that we attribute power to all kinds of things, and we need to do something in our heart in order to step back and circumcise from those beliefs and those attributions. And so within the heart of Gentiles who had been sacrificing to idols, they needed to make sure that their heart was brought into the right position. And so Paul said, tell him to abstain from sacrificing to idols. What was he doing? He was telling them to engage in this command so that their hearts were no longer giving power to something that has no power, something that is not a God. So in 1 Corinthians 10, it says, eat anything sold in the meat market without raising questions of conscience. Okay? Conscience, he's not addressing the issue here, and we're going to read the whole chapter in a moment, but we're going to read some other things before. He is addressing the issue of idolatry. You can eat anything in the meat market without raising questions of conscience as far as idols are concerned. Now, does that mean you can eat anything in the meat market without raising questions of conscience as to whether there's blood in that meat, or whether that animal was cared for well in its life, or whether that animal was slaughtered correctly, or whether that animal was strangled? No, you are supposed to be accountable to know whether those things are true or not. But as far as an idol is concerned, an idol is nothing. Now let me show you how I know that. 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Now about food sacrificed to idols. We know that we all possess knowledge, but knowledge puffs up while love builds up. Those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know. But whoever loves God is known by God. So then, about eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, and that there is no God but one. No God but one. So even if Allah was the name of a false god, which it's not, it means God in Arabic. But even if it was, or even if, as Jesus said, they don't know who they worship. True Christians know who they worship. But there are even false Christians who don't know who they worship. Why are you so comfortable with them? Do you see what I mean? We shouldn't be comfortable with them if we're not comfortable with other people. There's only one God. There's no other God. You don't need to be afraid of something that doesn't even really exist. You're the one attributing power to that. But if you've been accustomed to sacrificing to idols, then you should abstain from it until your heart is brought into understanding. That is the case of Islam, by the way. They worship what they do not know. True Christians worship what they do know. They worship what they don't know. But how did Jesus treat them? How did he treat those who worshiped what they do not know? He taught them. He stayed with them. Over his own people, he stayed with them. You know why? Because they were willing to listen over his own hometown. No one should act like they're better than anyone else. So then, about eating food sacrificed to idols, we all know that an idol is nothing at all in the world and that there is no God but one. For even if there are so-called idols, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came, and for whom we live. And there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live. Now listen to what he says. But not everyone possesses this knowledge. Some people are so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god. Is Paul talking about an issue of conscience? This is what he's talking about. The Gentiles who'd been sacrificing to idols. They're still so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god. And since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. Why? Because if you believe something to be a sin, you best not do it. But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. Be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. For if someone with a weak conscience sees you, with all your knowledge, eating in an idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat what's sacrificed to idols? And then, of course, they're going to think that they're going to attribute power to that idol. So this weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed by your knowledge. When you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them to fall. You understand what Paul is saying? So he is not saying, and then in chapter 10, he goes on to say, eat whatever's sold in the market. But let me tell you something. What was being sold in the market needed to be sacrificed in a particular way, needed to be slaughtered in a particular way. It still could not have any blood, still could not have been strangled or tortured, brought through a slaughter mill. Let's read 1 Corinthians 10, verse 23. I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. Eat anything sold in the meat market without raising questions of conscience, for the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. If an unbeliever invites you to a meal and you want to go eat whatever is put before you without raising questions of conscience. But if someone says to you, now look, this is telling us the context with which Paul is speaking. He's not talking about strangulation or torture or the way that the animal is slaughtered. He's talking about food sacrificed to idols. Listen to what he says. But if someone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then do not eat it, both for the sake of the one who told you and for the sake of conscience. Now, the only person who's going to say this has been offered in sacrifice is one who thinks that means anything. Someone who knows that doesn't mean anything isn't even going to bother to say it because it's insignificant to them. If someone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then do not eat it, both for the sake of the one who told you and for the sake of conscience. I'm referring to the other person's conscience, not yours. For why is my freedom being judged by another's conscience? If I take part in the meal with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of something I thank God for? Okay, so that's the position of Paul. Your freedom should not be the reason for destroying a brother or sister who is still, their heart is still trying to get there. God's going to bring him there. He's going to bring him to that understanding. When I was very new to God drawing me to himself, I had gone to an Indian market. I had purchased some things, but I remember that behind the register, there was a man, there was a man at the register, and behind him, they had a little shelf, and it had these tiny little figurines. I mean, it's just silly, right? It's silly. These are your gods. You put them on a shelf, and if there was an earthquake, they would topple over. It's silly and goofy, but I got home, and I remembered those little figurines, and I ended up throwing out all of the groceries because I felt that these had been, the food had been, I don't know if they've prayed over it. I don't know what they're doing in that Indian grocery store. My conscience was weak. I didn't understand yet. But as time went on, God brought my heart into understanding. False gods are nothing. Now, that said, I have not eaten anything but fish in a restaurant. I don't really go to restaurants anymore. Personally, I can cook better than any restaurant. And it's too darn expensive to go out anymore, at least where I live. It's not enjoyable. I don't enjoy being around people who don't know how to behave in Los Angeles. So I would rather just eat at home. Besides the fact that I just don't have the money for that anyway. But when I have gone out, for certain occasions with, family members and stuff like that, I either eat vegetables or beans and rice or fish, because you don't have the same regulations with regard to fish. I don't eat meat when I go out because I don't know how that animal was treated. I don't know how that animal was slaughtered. I have yet to go to a halal restaurant. My kids have gone to a halal pizza place. I'm going to tell you something about this, is that, they discovered after going to a couple of halal pizza places that those pizza places were actually serving pork pepperoni, or at least had that option on the menu. And one time they went to order a pizza, and the person at the restaurant told them that was halal pepperoni, which would be beef pepperoni. Listen, all food is clean. All food is clean. This isn't an issue of not being able to eat pork. The issue is that the two places where you would go to purchase meat that has been slaughtered correctly according to the Bible and treated correctly according to the Bible, they don't eat pork. Orthodox Jews and Muslims, they don't eat pork. So we know we haven't had pork in a very long time, because we know that the only two groups that would be slaughtering that meat correctly, of course, unless you go to you have a private person who has slaughtered the pig correctly, and all that, but we don't live in an area where that's accessible to us. So that's the reason why we don't eat pork. But see, if I go to a restaurant, I don't know how that animal has been treated. I don't know how that animal was slaughtered. Now, they've gone to these pizza places and they're serving pork, which is very concerning, because if they're not following their own religion, then what would make me think that they are actually serving meat that comes from an animal that was treated well and was slaughtered correctly? I mean, if they don't even have integrity to follow their own religion, and they're lying, essentially they lied and said that was halal pepperoni from a cow, and my kids know the difference between what a cow tastes like and what pork tastes like. And it's on their menu, right? So we still have to use discernment. Like I said, I have yet to go to a halal restaurant, so I just haven't eaten meat out. I just eat it, when I can afford it. I go to the halal market, and I go and get my meat. So in answer to the question about, when you go to a Mediterranean market or restaurant, are you going to be able to, eat meat? Depends on your conscience and what your agreement is with God. What do you feel from God? Do you feel comfortable asking them, is this meat halal? I personally would not have an issue with going to a halal restaurant and eating meat. I just haven't yet. And to be honest, when I had wealth, I used to eat out all the time. I honestly have no desire to eat out. It is a burden to me. I do not enjoy it at all. To me, it feels like I have to go out into the world and be around the world in order to try to enjoy something that just is not enjoyable to me. All right, verse 28. But if someone says to you that this has been offered in sacrifice, then do not eat it, both for the sake of the one who told you and for the sake of conscience. I'm referring to the other person's conscience, not yours. For why is my freedom being judged by another's conscience? If I take part in the meal with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of something I thank God for? So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Do not cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews, Greeks, or the church of God, even as I try to please everyone in every way. For I am not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that they may be saved. By the way, guys, if you have a genuine question you really want to know, don't be embarrassed. You don't have to be embarrassed about asking any question. If your question is asked with the right heart, you genuinely want to know so that you can do what's right, don't be embarrassed. It's okay. I'll come to your defense. I think this person genuinely wanted to know. I don't see any malice in their comment whatsoever. What I see is that she's genuinely trying to do what she believes is right. She's incorrect, in terms of assuming that Allah is some false god. But I believe that I can see a genuine heart here who wants to do what's right, and that's good. Thanks for listening. Please ask questions if you have them, and please discern this message with God.